SEO specialists. And I developed a kind of skills self-assessment as part of my role as a content leader in a design practice. And so, like most people do in companies, you go through performance reviews twice a year, and we would use a framework similar to this to assess the performance of our content strategists, to consider them for promotions. And it was super important to have a framework that was as objective and measurable as possible, because we had to compare our content strategists' performance to our designers' performance, to our UX researchers' performance, to other skills and disciplines across the company. So what we'll go through is just a bit of an exercise to design a business card. We're going to plot that card on the domains of content practice. I'll talk about my perspective on how I think about the different domains and strategy. Then I'll walk you through the skills self-assessment, and then we'll go through a goal setting framework at the end that I'll leave you with to think about for your own growth in 2025. If you come over here to the right, you'll see a bunch of empty self-assessment boards. And so once we get to this exercise, you can go over here, claim yourself one of these boards by putting your name on the top, and fill this out for yourself. And of course, if you would like just your own private version, what you can do is come up here and make a copy of this board into your own Miro space. Miro is a free tool. It allows you up to 3 free boards, so you can use one for this if you want your own to go forward with. So we're going to start here. So like I said, this is a skills self-assessment for content strategists or people working in content-focused roles. You can also use it as a practitioner outside the discipline. So for example, I've had SEOs come to me, or product managers or engineers who want to learn more about content strategy. They can also use this to assess how they're doing. And so if you would go ahead and open up the board link, I see a bunch of you in here, so I feel like that is working for everybody. Come over here and pick your card and just put your name and your title, whether you're working in content or not. Maybe if you don't have a current content job, you could put the job you want here, and maybe put some of your skills, or just some visuals that represent who you are. And then I'd like you to drag this whole card over here once we go through that. So let's all just spend a minute here. It looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people who are ahead of the game. For the rest of you, if you want to come over to me, and if you see my face in the top of Miro and you're wondering where I am, you can always just click on my face to come find me. So come over here and I'll just show you how I would do this. So I'd come in here and be like, my name is Matt Herron. I'm a principal level content strategist. I really love doing information architecture, UX strategy, design strategy. I like taxonomy work. And so just kind of give us a sense of, where you are. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this or drag it over, and we're going to talk about the domains of content strategy. So when I think about content strategy, I think about it in these kind of 4 buckets, and there are certainly competing frameworks. This is not, any kind of vetted industry standard, but it is the way that I've thought about content most holistically, and I find it super useful because people can be in different areas. And so I've broken out the content strategy discipline, or the content discipline, if you want to go even broader, into 4 domains. So there's the technology domain, the operations domain, the marketing domain, and the design domain. So you can think about this like content technology, content operations, content marketing, content design. There's an old card I had for myself here. I put myself in the middle as a content strategist. My title has always been content strategist, senior content strategist, director of content strategy. And I've done a little bit of everything, but mostly I'm really in the design space firmly. And I do a little bit of technology with the content modeling work I've done. I do a little bit of marketing. I do a little bit of operations. And here's another example. If somebody was sitting up here, their title might be content architect. I know a content architect at Atlassian who is very much in technology and ops and now localization. If you were more down here, you might be a content designer or a UX writer. And if you are over here, you might be a content marketer or a director of content marketing. I see, for example, Tony's over here, and he's a content director. And so it'd be really interesting to see where the rest of you are. Regina's content design. We have Paula up here, kind of straddling marketing, operations, a little bit of design and technology. And I think the more you are in this discipline, the closer you get to the middle, right? As you start to work in these different domains. Looks like we got a couple stray visuals in here. I'm just gonna drop them out real quick. Okay. All right. So content strategy is contextual, right? It can mean different things to different people, and often both can be right. You can sit in the operations side or in the technology side and have the same title, right? You could just be called a content strategist. That's one of the confusing things about this discipline. Over the last few years, the discipline or the title of content design has emerged. Sometimes those people are called UX writers, right? And so titles aside, this is a useful exercise to see where you really sit. And once you know where you sit in this context, you could decide where you want to grow. I know, for example, people who were more general content strategists who had decided that they just want to do content architecture, content modeling, content architecture, and they narrowly focused on those skill sets, kind of ignoring some of the other ones. Content strategy spans many orgs, teams, and disciplines. So when I worked in a design practice, we supported the marketing side of the business, and we supported the design side of the business, and we supported like CMS implementations. So you can be a content person and work in these different contexts across teams or across orgs or across disciplines. The other thing to keep in mind is that content strategy roles and titles just continue to evolve, right? The new term content designer that's emerged in the last few years is gaining popularity, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a new discipline. It is the same thing that we've been doing for a long time. You could be more strategic or more executional in any of these roles. And the purpose of this exercise is really to help you just develop awareness of your unique role and focus. And so I just want to elaborate briefly on this because there is some disagreement around whether strategy should be its own thing. Like, should strategy be its own bubble in here? And some people think the answer to that is yes, which is a valid point. My perspective on this is that strategy is the z-axis that kind of moves uh, further towards you, right? Towards you from your perspective, and the further away. And so somebody who is, a UX strategist or a design leader may be very strategic, but they may have started in a very executional role as a UX writer or as a content designer. And so you could be in operations and be very executional, or you could be in operations and be very strategic. So that's my perspective on that. I don't like strategy as the domain because I think of it all as strategy, and you are more or less strategic depending on your discipline, your organization, your experience, your altitude, like where you're focused. So I'll pause there and see if anybody has questions about this Venn diagram. And it's really interesting to see as people populate in where they end up.
Yeah, Matt, I put a question in the chat. I mean, you mentioned John Collins, for example, who I think of as,
Yes.
content engineer, right?
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
definitely both sort of a technical and design capability where
Yeah, John would put himself here between technology and operations.
mm,
The work he does now in content localization and translation is more in the content design space, but him as a content architect, he puts himself here in technology and ops, right? Mostly what he's doing is content modeling for headless CMS implementations and omni-channel content delivery and CMS selection and migrations and implementation.
right. And I ask partly because I think the term content design can mean different things to different people, right? Because
Totally,
I have
totally.
heard that both, kind of used as a description of what we would call content engineering, right? Which is modeling and,
Yes.
developing structured content, uh, you know, capability. And content design, I've also, has become somewhat synonymous with what at one point was called UX writing, right? So
That's right.
I wonder,
That's
if you
right.
could kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, my perspective on this after, looking at it and teaching it and researching the terms is that people use UX writer and content designer in the market as synonyms. For
Yeah.
example, Google right now is advertising a role called content designer and UX writer. It's one role. And
Mm,
so they often use these terms as synonyms. The term content designer came about not because the skills were different, but because the context of the team was different. And so what happened at some of these companies, this happened, for example, at MailChimp and at Slack, is that they had content strategists, like a content strategy team, doing content design and UX writing work, right? Like interface copy, information architecture for settings and preferences menus, conversational design. And the teams felt that their role was more design focused. And so they renamed their teams to be content design. And so in a lot of these cases, the move from UX writing or from content strategy to content design is a political move to put them at the same level as the visual designers, as the product designers, as the UX designers, content designers, right? To give them a parallel titling system so that they could more effectively have these conversations with people as a design peer and equal, and not as, a strategist who's only going to sit up here in planning, or as a UX writer who's only down here in interface copy. And so content design gives them that positioning.
yeah. Yeah, and I see Vonetta, added into the content or into the chat there that titles were updated to content designer slash UX writer. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so if your job is mostly like writing content that's informed by research, or doing, like journey mapping, a lot of content designers do a lot of journey work. They do a lot of archetype work. They do some, some testing, right? Like you might be running voice and messaging tests. All of that stuff could fall under content design UX writer. And a lot of people feel that even though they were called content strategists, what they were doing was design work. And so it just made sense to make that shift.
Mm,
I also know people who were content strategists who then moved to UX writer positions, right? Or somebody who was a content strategist who became a content modeler. And so these moves are possible. And I think what's interesting about this Venn diagram is it shows you where you are so that you can get where you want to go, wherever that is for you. And that
mm,
can change year to year, and it can change throughout your career, and that's okay. This is useful to know what the other options are.
right. Yeah. Well, and I think what we've seen too, right, is that titles don't necessarily 100% map to what you're doing day to day, right? And so
Absolutely.
you may be doing a larger, content. Okay, what is that? Uh, sorry, I'm seeing
What's
a.
that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw something in the chat that seemed a little off. That the titles are not necessarily representative of
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
your actual tasks, right? And so,
Hmm. And
which is
my
a
title
challenge if
at
you're
the
looking for jobs. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the hardest part is in the job search, right? Because I could see four roles, all content strategists, and they could all be in wildly different domains. One could be ops, one could be marketing, one could be design, and one could be tech, and they could all have the same title. That's super confusing. And so knowing this context helps you if you're going into a job interview situation to say, like, what kind of role is this? Is this a marketing focused role or is it a design focused role? Because the title is not necessarily going to tell you. Um, Myself at the agency, I started as a senior content strategist, and I eventually became the director of content strategy. And I kept the term content strategy because one project I would be doing content architecture, content modeling work. And the next project I'd be doing navigation design. And the next project I'd be doing a blog strategy. And I was like, I'm moving between these domains so often that I'm just going to keep strategist because day to day, what I'm doing actually changes.
Yeah.
So, um, now that you've contextualized yourself, let's move on. And what I'd like you to do is to pick one of these frames over here on the right, and there's two frames, the skills and the goals. And so just pick one for yourself to work in, and I'll walk you through the one here in the middle that I have um, locked down. Oh, I thought I had it locked down. I guess I unlocked it when I was messing with things. Lesson learned. Okay, so Now what you're going to do is once you know your context, then the job of this board and this tool, this self-assessment, is to really assess yourself honestly. And so we have this key up here. So if you have this dotted circle, that means that skill is new to you. If you have the one line and it's blue, that means you're learning the skill, you're growing in this skill, or you're excelling in this skill. And so what I want you to do is to go find your frame, an empty one for you, and go through this as I'm talking you through it and put your own level on each skill. So, and I would do this with my content strategy team. It didn't necessarily follow this exact format. It was kind of customized for the company, but I've separated each skill into the kind of area or domain that it's in. And so, for example, content inventories and audits. How comfortable am I? Is that a new thing to me? Am I growing in the skill? Am I excellent in the skill? So for me, I would put excellent here because I've done a ton of these. Information architecture for navigation, wayfinding, or page templates. Am I growing in that? Am I new to that? Have I ever done it? And then we just go down the list. Designing controlled vocabularies and taxonomies, modeling content for CMS implementations, writing for interfaces, UX writing or content design, content ops, uh, including governance, conversational design for chatbots, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have these split right now into strategy, and then design. These are more design focused skills. So facilitating workshops, creating archetypes from research, mapping a user journey, crafting design principles, developing a product vision. And then we have some SEO skills, some storytelling focus, like brand messaging focus skills, some marketing skills, some leadership and influence skills, some UX research, and then just an empty box for anything that you might need that is specific to your role. Because, as we know, content people have a wide range of skills, and it's very contextually dependent on the organization. So what I'd like to do is let's just put 2 minutes on the clock, something that's not too long, and you guys can just take a second and reflect on your skills and how you're doing. And it's okay if the skill framework or tree at your job is slightly different than this. I think it's helpful to, map some of the skills into here, but then, you have something like SEO, which is really marketing focused, but is also a little bit technical. So I broke that one out into its own table, because you could be doing technical SEO. You could be looking at schema. Schema is, a structured content framework for search. So that's a little bit of tech and a little bit of marketing. You could be doing, publishing workflows for a company. You could be doing a blog strategy. So there's a lot of different stuff that goes in here. I've broken it out into these categories just to make it easy to use. But depending on the organization and your team's needs, you might revise this or refine it a little bit. Does anyone have questions about any of these skills that are listed here? Anything that maybe you're not familiar with or needs a definition? I
Put
would
any
also
questions.
love to.
Oh,
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, put any questions in the chat and
Marcia. Yes, most recruiters do not know the difference. That's very true. Michelle says I got bamboozled by a content strategist title. Yep. Content designer and UX writer. Yeah, totally. I mean, I can't tell you as a design focused content strategist. I would call myself a UX content strategist, or even I have one person I'm coaching right now. She calls herself a content experience designer.
mm,
Wonderful title, but it's very unique, right? It's very content focused and designy. And yet, when I look at the market, I would say 70% of the content strategist title jobs are like marketing focused. It's easy to get bamboozled. I kind of have a screening set of questions that I use if I'm interviewing for a role. Like, what are you actually going to have me doing? Am I making journey maps or am I writing interface copy?
yeah, well, I think it is true that, recruiters don't necessarily, obviously don't have the context that we have as people who are in the field, what any of these things actually mean, right? And so,
Hmm.
someone tells them we need to recruit a content strategist, they may or may not really understand what that means.
Absolutely. Has anybody found a skill that is missing from the framework that they had to add in the empty table? I always like to know this to see if there's something that's just like a glaring gap. The other thing that's interesting to call out here, leadership and influence. If you're at the individual contributor level, you might not need, what you might traditionally think of as leadership skills, but you should still be able to build influence among people. And these soft skills are kind of hard to define. So the way I've defined them here is leading content for an organization, or leading design, leading marketing, or leading specific projects or initiatives. And so this kind of ladders up from initiative to a marketing program, design programs, or content in general. But you could change this to be, a little bit more soft skill-y. Again, that's one of those things that's just so dependent on the company and your role. I mean, you might just not be interested in that stuff right now, and that's okay. I've had people turn down, management leadership positions in content because they just really wanted to focus on the craft, and that's just a wonderful choice. AI skills, yes.
Oh,
Marcia, I
yeah.
made this before the AI skills like took off. You might add like designing prompts or familiarity, training AIs. I know people who are working for Google writing those AI search things, right? Like they're fine tuning the algorithm. You might even um, put some kind of structured content that turns into knowledge graphs. Um, yeah, I do. Governance is an interesting one too. That one could be broken down much further. I just have it here as content ops, including governance. Mostly what I've done in the governance space is governance strategies for organizations, or like publishing workflows, or, roles and permissions in a CMS, and what's like the publishing workflow, who has to approve this, when does legal sign off, that sort of stuff. But governance goes deep. So I would say if you are in governance, down here. Oh, you meant AI governance. That's interesting. I think AI governance is a can of worms we probably don't have time to get into today.
No question. Uh, Matt, could you kind of zoom in a little bit or show?
Sure.
So Jennifer is asking kind of where the list of skills is. So I think you've got it on the screen now, but this maybe just talk here and show kind of where. So if it wasn't clear, everyone is allowed to, he's created a bunch of copies of this set of
Over here.
skill assessments. Yeah, so you can kind of grab one for yourself, put your name on it, so that so that it's
I see
clear it's
the
yours.
names here.
Yeah, and then there's a list of skills, and then up kind of next to the text up there, there's a set of sort of these well, basically what you see him doing now, right? Which is, are you what's your level of expertise in this particular skill?
Mhm. And so I'll do mine. Like I'm really, really, I've done a ton of information architecture for navigation. I've done a ton of content audits and inventories. Um, I'm, s- I would consider myself well versed in vocabularies and taxonomies, but could learn a little bit more. Same with modeling. I think somebody like, John Collins is really the expert. I see him as the expert in content modeling, but I've done several projects now. Writing for interfaces, I feel the same. I'm a little bit less in content ops, a little bit less in conversational design. And I've done a ton of CMS selection, content migration, personalization strategy for content is a big thing. And then localization, I'm a little weaker on. I don't have a second language. I haven't done a lot of translation. So that's an interesting one. That's kind of how I would do it for me for this strategy one. I've done a ton of workshop facilitation, archetypes, user journey mapping. I'm very deep in the design discipline myself, and I get a little bit lighter once I get down here to SEO, although I consider myself probably the weakest in technical SEO, but decent in SEO strategy. So that's kind of how I'd think about it. And then, thinking about your role, what you do, you could adjust it. So, all right, I'll walk you guys through this last frame. So finally, once you assess your skills and you feel pretty good about where you are, you might see a gap. And you might think to yourself, huh, I want to learn how to do that better. One that I often find people in content want to get better at is the UX research side of it, right? I want to get better at user interviews. I want to learn how to do usability testing. I want to learn how to do, tree testing for a new information architecture. I want to do field work, or learn how to run quant surveys. And so all of these are useful skills for content strategists. And so we'll just use one of those as an example. So my desired outcome might be, um, run my own UX research/tests, and I might want to learn um, tree testing. And so, the measurable result, if I'm learning tree testing, could be a complete tree test analysis deck and present it to a client. If I'm running my own UX research and tests, it might be learn optimal workshop, or maze, right? Which are two tools for running these kind of UX research projects. Um, so familiar or comfortable in maze. I might also, if for tree testing, like learn how recruiting works, be able to recruit users myself. It's one thing to be able to, create a test. It's quite another to be able to actually run it and recruit people who fit your target audience to complete the test. And I might say, okay, well, I think this is going to take me about 6 months. And then, I'd list the skills that I need to develop. So I got to learn maze or optimal workshop. I've got to build a tree test. I've got to learn about IA, whatever those things are. And areas you want to grow in. So like UX research would be the area here. And so I might think, okay, I've got to go talk to some UX researchers. This one is high priority because my organization uses Optimal Workshop. We have a license, and I might need some help, with my UX research. So maybe I go find an expert and talk to them. And then goal setting. So this is just a fun goal setting framework. If you've never used SMART goals before, it's a great place to start. They're not the end all be all, but it gives you a good framework for how to write a goal. So you might say, I want to run, let's say run 2 tree tests in order to achieve, successful, oh, successful IA for navigation design. And I might say by Q2 2025. So there's a specific goal, running 2 tree tests that's measurable, right? It's binary. Did I do 1? Did I do 2? To achieve a successful IA for navigation, meaning that it was designed by the design team and implemented by the development team and, successful for users by Q2 2025. And so that's a way to think about goals for yourself. So it's a fun exercise, just something to do as you were thinking about your 2025. I'd love to hear from anybody who had an aha moment as they were going through this. What did you guys realize or learn about yourself? We'll zoom back in on mine.
Hi, yeah,
Sorry.
thanks. So what I realized in going through this exercise is that this is excellent because it really puts all of the skills in these like little neat containers, like these, I guess, areas of focus.
Mm,
And there's so much to learn. And I think this is great. And that's why I'm glad I joined this tonight because
good.
I really want to like frame my skills in this way instead of just like the simplified version of, oh, I do UX writing and I write
Mm,
micro copy. It's like a lot more in a strategy, sure, but this like really breaks it down into like smaller pieces, which helps you
right.
focus on what you want to improve in. And I'm gonna like totally, can I borrow this and show this to my manager tomorrow?
Oh,
Because I totally
absolutely.
will.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And a great question for your manager is like, if you want to get from this level to that level, which of these things do I need to learn and master so I can get,
Ex-
that promotion, that project,
ex-
that role?
exactly. Exactly. Because I've been doing my job for 3 years and I feel like I should be more proficient and I need to really
Mm,
dial into what areas I need to strengthen in. So yeah, this is so
love
helpful.
that. Love
Um,
that.
I'll
Good.
let
I'm so
someone else
glad.
talk, but I've been filling out the things slowly but surely. But yeah, this is great.
Love it. Love it.
It's awesome.
Let's check out Vanetta's. Nice. Nice. Yeah. Anyone else?
I did see a question that maybe while other people are thinking about what they want to share. Marcia, you should be able to unmute now. I just changed the setting. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Let me know if you're still not able to. There you go.
yes, my aha moment, and thank you for having this session here. Is have you ever heard of that you can do 99% of the things right, but you're gonna be judged by the 1% that you didn't do it right?
Sure.
That's exactly it. When I said the recruiters don't know, is because often, because I'm on the job market, and often you hear, but you don't write. It sounds like, and it's the only
Uh,
thing I don't do. And but it's the only thing people see, right? Because everything
mm,
else is what go behind the scene. And looking
yeah.
at that and filling out, I'm like, oh my God, I do a lot of stuff. I be feeling
Right.
like bad because yeah, I do not do the final writing. But
Mm,
thank you for that because it shows me, yeah, I do a lot of stuff. I just don't
mm.
write.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, sure. And maybe like if you don't want to do interface copy or like writing support topics, for example, stay away from the term content design UX writer, right? Because that implies that there's some kind of writing or storytelling involved. Um, you might consider like content strategist, content architect, some other title that's just a better fit for the work you're doing.
I do write support, but the point is, and that's something I've been meaning to mention. I see content strategy slash design is in the same fork that design UX and graphic design it was years ago,
Mm,
where you see some people that start as a UX designer, they were never a graphic designer. And you see
yeah,
graphic designers that don't want to be a UX designer and they
right,
still ask for prototypes. So
right.
that is the same thing. Like I never
Yes.
did writing. I do not want to do writing. I do writing support, technical documentation. I do. I don't do interface. And my point is
Mm,
because I started that. I started as a lot of
uh,
people I know from the Bay Area, they were writers on the payroll of the company, and they came to
yep.
me and said, now my manager wants me to do a strategy. What's that all about? So basically,
Yeah.
they were writers that become a strategist. I was always a strategist, so I'm not gonna dare to try start writing now.
Right, right. That totally makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to get away from the writing if you want to be in strategy and in content, because I think a lot of people just think it comes with the territory. But we had this tension when I was at the agency where they would try to like take and resource my UX writers to do like social media posts. I was like, please don't. That's not what they're for, right? They're there for interface copy and UXy sort of stuff, not writing social campaigns. So there's just, I think, a lack of education in the broader industry, and so it's our job to kind of advocate for the way that we want to be understood and perceived.
And
But it's an uphill battle.
even if I do not apply for the content design, I only apply for content strategy. I need to read the job description because often it
Mm,
says create content, create
yes,
UX,
yes,
blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not
yeah,
content strategy, but it's, well, I guess it is in at Facebook and Google, it's still called strategy because they do both, but that's not me.
yeah. even Google started to use the content designer and UX writer term when it's that kind of work. One question I ask recruiters or hiring managers is, what percentage of my work or what percentage of my time am I expected to be writing? Like, what's the breakdown? And if they say, oh, it's content strategy, but it's 80% writing, I say no, thank you. But if they say it's
If it's support
15% writing,
writing,
it's okay.
if it's support documentation, writing, governance, I love that. I just
Yeah.
do not, I don't feel like I am the best person to put the final words in an interface. That's me.
Yeah, so it's the UX copy, the interface copy that's uncomfortable
Yes,
for you.
exactly.
Yeah. But I have a related question here in the chat from Michelle, and she asked, what does narrative storytelling encompass as a specific skill? What's that look like? So the reason I put that in as a separate skill is if you are in a presentation and you're telling a story, that's to me narrative storytelling. Also, you could do a narrative like content marketing kind of storytelling. Like, for example, Contentful, which is a headless CMS that's very popular, has this great video they did. It's like documentary style video that's a content marketing effort. Somebody wrote the narrative for that documentary. And so that's the kind of storytelling. Narrative storytelling could be like long form journalism. And of course, many journalists are in content strategy. We have a deep bench of technical writers and journalists or former journalists who have become content strategists. And many of those folks are deep in narrative storytelling. But I also think about narrative storytelling as a skill that you are verbally telling a story to an audience, like especially even if you're delivering a strategy, a content strategy that you wrote into a deck, if you're delivering that to a client, that's storytelling too. So we used to practice at the agency, we would do lightning talks, like internally in studio time, where we would do 5-minute stories, could be about anything, like, let me come tell you about my cats, right? And that just gets you practice telling stories in person. And that's a skill that I think content strategists really need. It's important to sell the story, right? Not just, oh, here's what you need to do with your metadata, but why are we doing this? What's important about this? What are we going to achieve when we do this? What do we have to overcome? What obstacles are in the way? And to be able to tell that in a compelling story that hooks people and keeps them on the edge of their seat rather than watching their eyes glaze over. Because there's nothing worse than having all the right information in a deck and delivering it in a deadpan style that causes your client's eyes to glaze over. So in the agency that I was in, narrative storytelling was something that we practiced.
Thanks, Matt. I think Vanetta had another question as well.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, but what you just said, yeah, I was like, yes, that's so important. Learning how to deliver your design results and like just giving the story of like the work you did and the importance of it and how it ties to business goals. Like that's definitely an area I want to improve in. But my question was regarding the marketing skill set section where it
Yeah.
says creating or writing marketing content. Yeah, so I have a question about that because we work with design, like UX designers are paired with a writer, and then
Ooh,
we also collaborate
nice.
with marketing.
Nice.
And
Yes.
sometimes I feel like it is very different than UX writing because that's why I don't work in
Oh yeah.
marketing or advertising anymore because I'm not trying to sell something, but I realize quickly it's a
That's it.
business. We're trying to like increase numbers in whatever way or increase number of users or sell
Hmm.
something. So
Yes.
but that's like two distinctive skill sets, right? Like when you're
100%.
doing marketing copy, even if it's in the interface.
That's right. Yeah. So in the same interface, you could have UX writing and copywriting next to each other. And let me see if I can find it real quick because I did a whole lesson on copywriting versus UX writing for my mastermind here. Let me just redo this real quick. So I'm sharing my whole screen. We're just going to see Zoom for a second and then it'll go away. So for me, this is the difference. Copywriting is writing for marketing. UX writing is writing for product or experience. Copywriting is trying to sell something. UX writing is trying to help you do something. And so that is the difference. Now here, for example, where's the UX writing on this screen? It's in the input placeholder and the button.
Yeah.
Where's the copywriting? It's this paragraph above. So they are completely intermingled, but they really are different disciplines. And this is why I was always fighting this battle when I was trying to resource a team of content strategists where we had a UX writing specialist. Is what would happen was marketing would come to resourcing and they'd go, "Oh God, we need a writer. All our copywriters are booked. Do you have any other writers?" And the resource manager would look at their spreadsheet and go, "Well, here's a UX writer. Will that work?" And they go, "Just give me anybody. Give me anybody. I'll take anybody." But they don't realize is that they really are separate skills. A lot of thinking and strategy and standards and design language systems go into these decisions here. This
Yeah.
paragraph is a different animal. It's just a different effort. And both are valid, both are important to the business. But I would argue that the best writer could do both, but sometimes you just need a specialist.
And to that point, do you think it would be helpful if someone's like, I want to be a dual type of writer, like a UX writer slash marketing writer?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you as a freelancer, it's useful to be able to do both. If I am a specialist in an organization, I might pick a path, right? If I'm on the agency side, a copywriter is going to sit in marketing and a UX writer is going to sit in design or product. And that's typically the difference in a product company as well. So if you look at a company like Stripe, they're going to have UX writers on their product design team, and they're going to have copywriters on their marketing and sales teams. And they are just going to have different skills. You know, copywriters are going to work on campaigns and landing pages and demand generation and lead gen, and UX writers are going to work on new features, journey maps, you know, experience design, innovation, that sort of stuff. And
Right.
again, this
Okay.
is not
Yeah.
like 100% of all companies do the same thing, but like just generally from what I've seen, that's kind of how people split out.
Okay. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you.
Sure.
Second quick follow-up is the content editing. Is that just editing
Mm,
existing content?
yeah. Yeah. Just editing
Okay.
skills, right? Like being able to apply grammar and, you know, word choice standards. Editing is a whole career. This is just one line in
Mm-hmm.
a table, but I would say that, you know, being able to write content is a skill. Being able to edit is a skill. Some people can do both, and some people are just editors.
Okay. I'm going to leverage all of it because that used to be our old title, editor, and then they updated everyone content designer slash UX writer, but we still edit. So it is
Yes,
a
yes,
separate
of
skill.
course. Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, even as a writer, it's like I put on my writing hat in the morning and I put on my editing hat in the afternoon, and yeah, they're just different skills.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, happy to help. Looks like we got another question here in the chat. JJ, do you have a question?
So
Oh,
I think that's good for the questions, Matt, if we can probably move a little bit forward.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was just gonna say though, I think we kind of hear from both sides here. We've had people who are talking about, what you see in job descriptions and, then, I know I've been on the other side of that and kind of working with a recruiter and trying to like write a job description. I think, the challenge here, right, is that many of us do a lot of things in the course of a day. And, how do you, from both sides, as if you're someone looking at a job description, how do you map your skills to that? And then if you're someone writing a job description, knowing that, again, any number of these skills could come into play. I think it's you know maybe it's just the nature of our sort of profession is that it's a little bit difficult to, unless you are very, very, very specialized. Most of us do a little bit of a lot of these things, which does make it hard both to identify, what uh job postings, are relevant to respond to, and, potentially, you know, be uh, you know, turned down for, because there's just something in there that you're not you know, you're not quite strong enough in. And then on the recruiting side, you know, being able to like accurately describe, you know,
Mm,
these conversations. I don't know that there's a question in there necessarily, but I guess I'm sort of curious, Matt, from your perspective, you know, how do you have any thoughts about sort of bridging that gap between the way that
mm,
companies sort of think about filling these roles? And, you know, we
yeah.
obviously have, I mean, we've certainly seen in our industry, you know, there've been a lot of layoffs. I know, you know, I know personally a lot of people who are looking, and, you know, is there are there sort of tells or ways to, you know, kind of spot the roles that might be, you know, a better match?
Yeah. It's definitely hard. I mean, I always go into that screening call with some questions about like what percentage of this is writing versus strategy, right? What am I going to be working on? What's the project? Like, are they redesigning something, or is this a product that exists in the market, or are we like way up in the innovation space? So I like to know what the context is of the role before I even consider it. But I'd really encourage anybody who's a content leader or a manager of content people to really get their act together and put some kind of performance review, evaluation, skill tree framework in place. It is shocking how many companies simply don't have this. And that translates into their recruiting process, right? Because if you're going to be recruiting for a set of skills and you don't know what skills your people need to have to perform successfully at the job, then the job post is going to be a confusing pile of mush. And we went through this too. It wasn't until we, um, you know, me as part of a larger leadership team put our heads together and developed a skills assessment framework for career growth that we were able to say, okay, this is a skill we expect of a junior, like let's say inventories and audits, but not of a senior. The narrative storytelling, presentations, like leading work streams, building influence and leadership, those sort of things. And so we had to really figure out, because I had people asking me like, well, I think I'm a senior, but my title's mid-level. How would I get up to what do I do to get up to senior? And we had to go, well, let's take a look, because we didn't know at the time. And so putting the framework in place was really a great clarifying effort for us as leadership. And I think it really helped give our people the clarity they needed to say, like, okay, it's this specific skill. I know exactly what I need to work on. Here's how I get the practice. And then I can, you know, reassess and develop how I've done over that period of time. Whereas before, they didn't really know what they needed to do at all. And it was the same like determining roles, right? Because we had a content strategy practice and we started specializing. So we hired our first UX writer. And before, all the content strategists were doing the UX writing. Well, then we hired a UX writer. And so that person could focus on the UX writing task, the interface copy for the apps and websites we were building. And the strategists could focus on like information architecture, navigation, and like strategy decks for marketing and design side of the business. And so then we had to differentiate, well, what's a content strategist do that a UX writer does? And what's a UX writer do that a content strategist doesn't do? And that was an interesting exercise. So I just really would like to see content leaders and content teams just simply having a framework in place. And I think a lot of that stuff will follow, because once we had that framework, writing the job description became so much easier.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that definitely. And I've seen that in the organization I work in too, that, you know, helping really define, you know, what is it exactly that we're looking for? Because it's,
Hmm.
you know, it's definitely, I mean, you know, from the hiring side, it's also, you know, it can be frustrating, you know, putting out a, you know, a job posting, and, you know, certainly you sympathize. I mean, you want, you know, obviously understand people are, you know, want to want a job, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, and then, you know, but getting people who are just wildly unqualified for it, you know, and realizing that, okay, what is it about the way we framed this job? I mean, I do know,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I keep an eye on these kinds of things. I'm not, you know, looking myself, but, you know, I watch content strategy job postings, and I see a lot of, you know, postings that will say something like content strategy, which, you know, means something to me like you're talking about, which is maybe sort of a higher level sort of strategy and thinking about, uh, you know, business goals and user understanding, all of the kinds of things that we think of, you know, and storytelling and, you know, all of that. but then the actual description is very, very specifically to write blog posts and,
Yes,
whatever,
yes,
so the mismatch between titles and job descriptions, I think, doesn't
yeah,
do anyone any favors. And I don't know,
no,
that any one of us
that's it.
on this call can necessarily fix that problem, but I do think it is kind of an
Yeah.
ongoing issue for us. And
That's
it
why I like
hurts
the
everyone.
framework, right? It takes us away from this attachment to titles to simply understanding what is the domain I'm in. Am I going to be on the tech side, on the ops side, on the marketing side, or on the design side? Like, I don't care what the title is. It could be content designers, content strategists, whatever. Tell me what I'm going to be working on and which domain I need to be expert in. And if
Yeah,
they tell me, look, you're going to be doing like production and publishing, and okay, I guess we're in ops, or if they say you're going to be designing a new information architecture for navigation, I'm in design now. Or I'm going to be implementing a new CMS. Maybe I'm in technology, and that's okay. And just like taking it out of the title, is I think people just get caught up in this and talking about what is the domain, what are the skills I need, how am I going to be performing, who am I going to be working with, and then worry about the title as kind of an afterthought.
yeah,
But it is
yeah,
hard. It is so hard as a job seeker.
right,
I know
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen some people who are well known in our industry who have been looking for jobs and been frustrated by the experience because
yeah.
they go, "Oh, that looks perfect for me," and then they get in the door and they're like, "Wait, but it said strategist, and you want me to be doing all execution work? Is that strategy? Not
Right,
really."
right, yeah. Yeah, I'm actually
Frustrating.
curious, and Vanetta, if you don't mind, I have a question for you because you mentioned that your titles were updated. I'm curious what they were before you were updated to content designer slash UX writer. Are you willing to?
Yes, yeah, I can share. Um, so for all the reasons that Matt mentioned earlier, they wanted to align us to become more to be thought of more as designers since we work with UX designers. So before, like officially in like HR, I guess, and in our like signature blocks in the phone, and what we were called in the phone book was editor and then senior associate. It was like very confusing because yeah, we were senior associates, but our like functional title was editor. But they decided to revamp everyone's titles, and now we're content designers slash UX writers, and that's what I have on LinkedIn just to align with what we call ourselves at my job. But before it was simply like you were an editor, and then you had different levels, so senior associate, VP, ED,
Hmm.
and above.
And my
And I
guess is
guess
this
they
is a
wanted to
kind of
align us with
legacy
the industry.
organization. It's like an
Mm-hmm.
older org, right? So editor has probably been around a long time and they just never updated the title, even though the skills and the responsibilities shifted over time.
Right, because it wasn't as comprehensive as saying you're a content designer, which is, I
Yeah,
guess, the bigger title, and then UX writer sits under that. But editor is just like we were talking about editing. That's like
yeah,
one skill, but a lot of people came from like publishing or journalism, and I guess that made sense for that context. But for like UX
exactly.
design, it's
Exactly.
not really comprehensive enough. And yeah, people didn't know we are actually designers. We design content.
Hmm. Yes. The
Yeah.
So I
hardest
guess it
thing
was a
is,
good thing.
what we do. Yeah, I mean, it might have been, and that could change again in 5 years as the organization changes, right? It's like the titles are almost a lagging indicator of what's
Yeah,
happening in
Hmm.
the
yeah,
organization.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say, I mean, I think for those of us who've been around for a while, I remember when content strategist really kind of started to become a title, and I had been for most of my career on the editorial side, but
Hmm.
remember seeing, kind of what content strategy consisted of and thinking, well, we used to call that being an editor, right? But an editor, not so much like a copy editor, but in the sense of like someone who understands, like, think of like a magazine editor, right? Who understands,
Right.
you have to think about who the audience is, and you have to think about the format, you have
Yes.
to think about what are the topics you want to cover and why, and what's the
Hmm.
tone that you want to present, what's your style, all of those things that we now kind of think of as content strategy. At one point, we would have kind of described as being part of, being something like, a more of an editorial role. And so, as you say, Matt, I think, titles are sort of a lagging indicator here that, some of these these tasks have been around. Storytelling has certainly been around since, people sat around, fires in caves and told one another stories, right? But,
Hmm.
at some point, things got documented and,
Yep.
codified and,
Yep.
whatever. And so, there's, in some ways, there's kind of not anything necessarily new here, except, the ways that technology changes how we do
That's right. That's
storytelling
right.
and communication, right? So,
Well, just remember our friends in design are going through the same thing, right? Is it visual designer? Is it UX designer? Is it product designer? Product designer is the new thing, but a lot of UX designers are like, well, that seems like what I've been doing for forever. And people
mhm,
who design physical products are like, what are you talking about?
right.
That's not product design. And so there's this confusion in
And
all
then there's
disciplines
graphic
and all
design, right?
roles.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I heard this with information architecture too. Some
Mhm.
actual architect was upset that information architects were using the term architect because in architecture, if you're doing buildings, like you need to be licensed, you need to have training, you need to go through certain schooling to be able to do architecture. And the title architect was, something that he like wore as a badge of honor. And to see like these
Yeah.
people adopting the term IA or information architect was kind of offensive to him. And so I think it just depends, where you come from and what organization you're in. Oh yeah, and then there's like solution architects. Don't even get me started. It's very confusing. So
Yeah, and content architect. Yeah, Matt, I see there's a question there about from Jennifer. If you're seeing the chat, I wonder if you could respond
yeah,
to that. Yeah.
that's a really good question. Can you review what would be expected for a junior level content writer? Yes. So I think the junior level content writers are typically taking assignments. So they're given briefs and their job is to execute on it. So like you take a brief and you write whatever you're writing, and then you deliver it to an editor who tells you it's good or bad, fix this, fix that. Whereas somebody who is a little bit more senior might be deciding what content to write in the first place, right? More of an editorial role. A lot of content writers or copywriters end up becoming creative directors, and then they're making creative decisions. A lot of UX writers might become a UX design manager at a certain point. So rather than writing the interface copy, if you're in a design context, as the UX writer, you're going to be, writing copy for interfaces that maybe have already been designed, or if you're doing a content first design approach, like writing some proto copy that then gets made into a design. Once you progress up your, in your career as you become more senior, you might be the person making that decision or defining which audience you're working with or running the journey mapping process, right? Um, when I worked with content strategists as the team leader, the junior folks would be participating in the workshops and the senior folks would be designing and running the workshops. And so that was one of the distinctions was, are you the facilitator and the leader in the room, or are you a participant in the room? And so we wouldn't ask a junior person to go facilitate a 10-person ideation workshop. It just wasn't fair to them. But as you got more senior, then we would put them in those positions to get those skills. And then once they were ready, they could be promoted to senior.
Can I ask follow up? This is Jennifer.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you. That makes sense. Um, I guess, can you tell me more specifically what kind of strategy, what kind of analytic type of skill you would expect a junior person to have? I mean, a
Mm,
familiarity or not an expert, but can you elaborate?
yeah. I think it just depends on the organization. So, again, for example, the content strategy team I led was in a design practice. And so I would expect a junior content person to be able to inventory a website, audit it, kind of assess it, tell me what's there. Um, and then a senior person, I would expect them to be able to do all that and then tell us, okay, now what do we do to fix this? I wouldn't necessarily expect a junior content strategist to lead the strategy themselves, but I would expect a senior person to do it. So that was one way that we distinguished between junior and senior content strategists. But if you're in a marketing organization, maybe the more senior person, the more senior content marketer or director of marketing, and somebody who's been in a director position on a marketing organization, tell me how it worked at your company. But you might say if you join a marketing organization as a content practitioner, at a junior level, you would be writing the copy for the web page, and at a senior level, you'd be assigning those tasks to others, or leading a work stream for a new campaign or a new landing page or a new feature. So I think it's the difference between, being autonomous and running with it by yourself and being led and managed by others.
Thank you. That's helpful and reassuring.
Sure, sure. Tony, you've worked a lot in content marketing. Does that seem to fit your paradigm, your mental model for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've talked about quite a bit here, it has evolved considerably, and it continues to evolve in a short period of time as well. And I'm noticing we just lost Paula too, so hoping she'll join back. But
Well,
I
it's
believe
late on the
everybody,
East
yeah.
Coast.
Maybe
She
there's
fell
a
asleep.
curfew in DC.
Right,
If
right.
anyone has additional questions for Matt, this would be a great time to get them in. Also, Matt, I know you've talked about copying this board on Miro and having people download it themselves to being able to work on their own. Maybe you
Totally.
might want to just talk about that a little bit in case people are doing it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. So my view on Miro is going to be a little bit different than yours because I own this board, but there's this 3-dot control system. They call it main menu at the top of Miro. If you click this, and then it's under board, make a copy, and this will duplicate this board, and you can delete anything you don't need and just do it yourself. Also, I'm going to drop my LinkedIn into the chat if you want to connect with me. I'd love to do that on LinkedIn. It's a great platform to talk content strategy with me. You can message me there or find a way to email me. Please use this thing. Like, take it, make it yours, help it fit your company, encourage your leadership to develop their own skills assessments and career growth frameworks, to make things a little bit more clear for everybody. But yeah, feel free to use this. You can always find me and all my stuff at storytelling.systems as well. So thanks for everybody's time today. I hope you found it useful. And again, feel free to use this stuff as much as you find it useful.
Absolutely. Any additional questions for Matt? And we should be able to unmute if there are. Nope. Okay, awesome. Well, we lost Paula, so we don't have the slide showing the date and time for January's event, but it is with Kevin Nichols, a reschedule from, I believe, our November event, and I believe it's similar to the talk he gave with Scott Abel today. Matt, this has been fantastic, so huge round of applause for you for helping us determine where we fit within our skill sets within this big Venn diagram we're calling content right now. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me. All right, everybody.
Absolutely. And thanks,
Have a great
everybody. Have a
night.
wonderful night.
Thanks. Good night.